On February the 19th, 1994, at 8:15 p.m., a 31-year-old woman named Gloria Ramirez was admitted to the Riverside General Hospital in Riverside, California. Within the hour, her mysterious condition would leave 23 people injured, 5 hospitalized, and herself dead, with no solid explanation to this day. However, it seems that now, through a series of terrifying coincidences and a whole lot of science, we may have an answer to what happened that night in Riverside, California. Hello everybody, today we are going to be talking about the mysterious death of Gloria Ramirez, also known as the Toxic Lady. Every aspect of this case, from the events of that night to the investigation that followed, is bizarre. If you're like me, then you've probably heard this story passed around on either old creepy YouTube videos or mystery internet forums. And while a lot of people have kind of chalked the case up to a supernatural occurrence or just one unexplainable phenomena that will probably never happen again, the true answer is much more terrifying and depressing. And if I had to suffer through it, then you have to suffer through it with me. So stick around as we talk about the death of the Toxic Lady, Gloria Ramirez. And you're not gonna have fun with it. I'm gonna have fun with it because I get to talk about it, but you're not gonna enjoy it. So get ready to watch me enjoy this. But before we talk about that, we need to talk about something that is admittedly less fun: life insurance. A lot of people either don't think life insurance is important or don't know how to pick out a policy, leading to a lot of people just not having it at all. And not only is it important, but now it's made easy, thanks to today's sponsor, Policy Genius. Policy Genius has modernized you getting a hold of a good life insurance policy. All you have to do is go to policygenius.com and from there answer a questionnaire. And from there, you'll be able to read through and compare all of your options in one easy step. With Policy Genius, you can find life insurance policies that start at just $39 per month for $2 million of coverage. Some options offer coverage in as little as a week and avoid unnecessary medical exams. Policy Genius has thousands of 5-star reviews on Google and Trustpilot. And that's because their licensed agents aren't incentivized to show you one company over the other and instead want to make sure you get the policy that's best for you. Because thinking about what will happen after we're gone is hefty enough, and we definitely don't want our loved ones picking up the bill. And if it's either for immediate cost, education, house payments, or what have you, it's nice to have a safety net. And while normally that safety net would be confusing and expensive, now it doesn't have to be. Because if you go to the link in the description at policygenius.com/Wendigoon, you will be able to get a free quote today. That is right. All you have to do is go to the link in the description, fill out the questionnaire, and you can see your options for free right now. Because life insurance is important, and you've probably got enough to worry about. So let Policy Genius take care of the complicated part. Again, policygenius.com/Wendigoon to get a free quote today. Thank you all so much for watching the ad, and thank you so much to Policy Genius for sponsoring the video. It really does mean the most. Hope you all check them out. Link is in the description, and we are back to the video. We are going to go ahead and get into it, but as always, thank you for watching. As mentioned, Gloria Ramirez was 31 years old, and 6 weeks prior to the events of February the 19th, she had been diagnosed with cervical cancer. Her prognosis wasn't good, as the cancer was already late stage by the time they discovered it. So 6 weeks later, Gloria calls an ambulance as she's suffering from shortness of breath and heart palpitations. So the ambulance shows up, puts an oxygen mask on her, and the paramedics rush her to the Riverside General Hospital. She arrives to the hospital at 8:15 and seems to be confused as she's unable to answer questions. While she's in this state of delirium, the doctors begin to sedate her in order to get her heart rate under control. And after this doesn't correct her heart rate, they decide to use a defibrillator. Whenever they open up her shirt to apply the chest paddles, they see that her skin is coated in a sort of glossy oil. The people in the emergency room take note of this and mention that it looks too thick to be sweat. However, they just assume that she's coated in some kind of lotion or oil, so they use the chest paddles anyway. The second strange occurrence comes when one of the nurses points out that Ramirez has a very strong garlic smell coming from her mouth. And according to everyone in the room, this is beyond Gloria just ate some garlic before she came to the ER. This is an overwhelming stench that everyone begins to notice. However, Gloria is actively dying on the table and they don't have a lot of time to ask questions, so they just keep pushing forward. A nurse named Susan Kane draws blood from Gloria's arm. However, as she draws the blood, she noticed that there's a strong ammonia stench coming from the syringe. While inspecting the syringe, Susan passes it off to a medical resident named Julie Gorginski. While inspecting the vial of blood, Julie notices that there seems to be these floating manila-colored crystals in the serum of blood itself. While the two of them were standing there discussing how Ramirez could have crystals in her blood, suddenly, Susan passes out. The attending physician in the emergency room, Dr. Ochoa, catches Susan as she's falling. He shakes her awake, and whenever she comes to, Susan says that it feels like her face is burning. Julie, the other person who handled the blood vial, says that she's feeling nauseous as well. She goes out into the hallway, sits down at a nurse's station, and whenever a nurse walks up to her and says, "Are you okay?" right before Julie can respond, she passes out as well. At the same time, the respiratory therapist Maureen Welch, who's in the emergency room delivering oxygen to Ramirez, passes out as well. So 3 people who were in the ER have fallen unconscious, and everyone else in the room is starting to feel ill. So naturally, the immediate thing they suspect is a gas leak. So they evacuate the entire emergency wing of the hospital. All of the patients are carried out on gurneys and stretchers and just wait in the parking lot. While that's happening, Dr. Ochoa and a few other workers stay in the room with Ramirez, trying to save her life. However, nothing seems to be working, and at 8:50, Gloria Ramirez is pronounced dead, only 35 minutes after she arrived at the hospital. At this point, the people in the emergency room thought that whatever was happening, it was coming from Gloria. So a couple of workers moved her to a quarantine room just to be safe. Right after Gloria's body was moved into quarantine, one of the workers who had moved Gloria, a woman named Sally Balderas, began vomiting and said that it felt like her skin was burning. To make sure that the hospital was safe, a team of people in full hazmat suits investigated the emergency wing. They found that there was no gas, chemical, or biological leak in the hospital. So whatever was happening must have been coming from Gloria. To contain whatever this was, Gloria's body was placed in a sealed aluminum casket. After this, the emergency rooms were able to be used again. However, 23 people reported feeling nauseous or ill, and 5 hospital workers were hospitalized. Among those were Susan Kane, who spent 10 days in the hospital, and Julie Gorginski, who spent 2 weeks in the hospital. So immediately the question became, what happened to Gloria Ramirez? And it became a national mystery, as you can imagine, as to what caused this bizarre, spontaneous sickness. Well, after 1 week, an autopsy was conducted. The reason they waited a week was so that if she had some kind of biological agent or supervirus inside of her, that it had enough time that it wouldn't be re-released whenever they actually performed the autopsy. They performed the autopsy in full hazmat gear as well, just to be double safe. And the craziest thing that they found in the autopsy is that she was completely clean. Or at least she was clean from any chemical or radioactive elements that would have caused what happened in that emergency room. The only things they found in her system were Tylenol, lidocaine, codeine, and Tygan. Tygan is an anti-nausea medication. These are all things that would be standard for a suffering cancer patient to have in their body. Also, that medication of Tygan is important because Tygan breaks down into amines in the bloodstream, which would explain the smell of ammonia on the blood vial. It doesn't explain the little crystals floating in the blood, but we'll get to that. In this initial autopsy, they were mainly looking for a cause of death, and it was determined that Gloria died due to heart complications that arose due to kidney failure. It seemed that the cancer, as well as the medication she was on, caused her to get kidney failure, and she was also going through the early stages of liver failure. These things caused a backup of toxicants in her system, which eventually led to heart problems and her eventual death. However, kidney failure doesn't explain why 23 people who were in the building also got sick. So they reseal her body, and then 5 weeks later, they perform another autopsy where this time they collect samples. Also in tandem with this, the Department of Health does an investigation at the hospital. And once again, they can't find anything that they're testing for, so the Department of Health determines that Gloria again died of kidney failure, and everything else that happened in the hospital was mass psychogenic illness, or in other words, mass hysteria. The reasoning for this, again, they couldn't find any direct kind of agent in Gloria's system that would have caused all of this. And also, they interviewed 34 people around the hospital to try to get all the information they could about that night. And it seems the people who were the most ill were women and people who didn't eat anything for dinner that day. So people who had skipped a meal. So the idea being that, oh, well, since it just seems people were a little bit hungry, I guess they got a little bit nauseous or whatever, and the people who got really ill were women. So, you know, women be crazy, I guess. And you may hear that and think the investigators were a couple of guys who were downplaying what these women said they experienced, but both of the investigators were women as well, so make of that what you will. Because while several of the men, like Dr. Ochoa, who was in the room the whole time, said that they felt ill, the only ones that passed out and had severe reactions, like feeling like their skin were burning, were female workers. So the Department of Health said everyone in this hospital is crazy and left it at that. The people at the hospital, as you could imagine, were not happy with this conclusion. One of the people who strongly disagreed with this conclusion was Julie Korchinski. If you'll remember, she was the second person to pass out on the night Gloria died. She spent 2 weeks in the hospital and developed hepatitis and avascular necrosis in her knees. So the hospital asked other people to take a look at the data, and eventually they reached out to the Lawrence Livermore laboratories. At Lawrence Livermore, they took the samples that were taken from Gloria's second autopsy, and instead of just running it through to see if they could find any toxicants, they decided to just run it for everything and see what was in her blood and tissues. The only thing they found, aside from some traces of other pain relief medication, was a chemical known as dimethylsulfone. Now, dimethylsulfone, or DMSO2, is a naturally occurring chemical that can be found in trace amounts throughout the body. If you eat a lot of plants or eggs or something that contains sulfur, it is a trace element that is made as a byproduct of your body's digestion process. However, dimethylsulfone is, for one, very, very sparse in the body to the degree that most people would never even test for it, and in the body, it naturally decomposes after about 3 days. And two, dimethylsulfone is harmless in any reasonable concentration. As a matter of fact, methylsulfone, which is also known as methylsulfonylmethane, or MSM, is a popular alternative medicine. So trace amounts in the blood wouldn't be enough to kill you. However, what was strange about this amount of methylsulfone in Gloria's system is that it was not a trace amount. From the samples that were taken 6 weeks after Gloria's death, she had 3 times the normal amount of methylsulfone in her system. And while that may not sound like a lot, remember, methylsulfone degrades after about 3 days. So if this was after 6 weeks, then at the time of death, she would have had dozens, if not 100 times the normal amount in her system. So Pat Grant, a scientist who was researching this case, decided to do some more digging. And he discovered a link to something known as dimethyl sulfoxide, or DMSO. Now, dimethyl sulfoxide and dimethyl sulfone are very similar to each other. They're just one oxygen atom apart. And DMSO has a whole history when it comes to medical treatments. Back in the 50s and 60s, DMSO was thought to be a sort of cure-all. People would take it as a pain reliever for sprains or breaks. They would take it for headaches. They would apply it in a sort of ointment if they had any kind of swelling or cramps. However, in 1965, doctors found that prolonged use of DMSO can cause damage to the lens of your eye. So the FDA began to blacklist it as a direct medication. Now, DMSO is still used in a lot of medication today. It is a much diluted form from what it was back in the 60s, but it's used as a sort of applicator in a lot of topical ointments that you use for like muscle pain or cramps. And you can even get straight up DMSO cream that is, again, diluted from what it was in the 60s, that is used as an alternative medicine for things like muscle pain. It's also used in veterinary medicine to treat horses with some kind of inflammation or swelling. So DMSO was kind of kept as a niche concept in medicine, at least when used by itself, up until the 1980s. when some scientists began to propose that DMSO could be a form of cancer treatment. As a matter of fact, 60 Minutes even ran an episode about it. So you have this chemical, dimethylsulfoxone, that a lot of people believe might be a kind of cure-all or treatment for cancer that is used in some part in, standard pharmaceuticals when it comes to like topical creams and stuff like that. But that wasn't enough for some people. So there is another way to get DMSO. DMSO, whenever it is highly, highly concentrated, is a very powerful degreaser. You can buy it in a gel form at hardware stores, and it gets used as everything from oven cleaner to paint remover. It is way more concentrated than even the pills that people were taking back in the 60s of DMSO, much less the way it's used in medicine today. But it was this little trick of the trade back in the 80s that if you were like a college athlete and you got sore muscles a lot, you could go to the hardware store, get some DMSO gel, rub it on the muscle, and then the next day, the pain would be gone. I cannot properly state the amount of chemicals you're shoving into your body when you are doing that. And for the sake of this YouTube video, let me be clear, do not rub oven cleaner on your body. So Pat Grant's researching all of this, and he finds that with the DMSO gel, it has the strong smell of garlic, which if you'll remember, is the same thing the people in the emergency room reported came out of the mouth of Gloria Ramirez. And that in its gel form, it looks like a bright, oily lotion, which if you'll remember, is the same thing they saw on Gloria's chest whenever they went to give her the defib. So it seems that Gloria maybe wanted to try DMSO as a home remedy for cancer, which again, a lot of people at the time believed that it might be, and that would explain the oil on her body and the smell coming from her mouth. However, it wasn't dimethyl sulfoxide that was found in her body, it was dimethylsulfone. So that would mean the DMSO in her body needed to be spiked with a lot of oxygen to become dimethylsulfone. So Pat Grant thought about this and remembered the detail that she was given an oxygen mask on the way to and while she was in the hospital. And it's not hard for dimethyl sulfoxide to become sulfone if introduced to an area with a lot of concentrated oxygen, like an oxygen mask. And the other interesting detail about DMSO2 is that at room temperature, it forms into small crystals. So Grant did an experiment. He took a blood sample, mixed it with DMSO2, and sure enough, small manila crystals began to form in the serum, meaning that could be the explanation to the crystals that Julie saw in the blood that night. Because while it was in Gloria's body, it was too hot to form these solid crystals, but as soon as it was removed and brought into the temperature of the emergency room, it cooled down and began to form the solid shards. Now, there's one big hiccup in all of this. Like, sure, we've got to the point that DMSO could have been what she put on, and that was converted into DMSO2, which would explain the smell of garlic, the oil on her body, and the crystals in the blood. And remember, the smell of the blood was explained with the nausea medication that we already established she was on. So it seems that all of that's taken care of. However, neither dimethyl sulfoxide or dimethylsulfone is toxic, and especially not toxic enough that it could get into the air and make a bunch of people sick. So Grant continued to do research, and he found that on the same tree of sulfoxide and sulfone, there is another chemical known as dimethyl sulfate, or DMSO4. Dimethyl sulfate is a nerve gas, or more specifically, it was tested in the 70s and 80s as an agent for nerve gas. As a matter of fact, dimethyl sulfate dates all the way back to World War I, when both France and Germany tested it for use in chemical warfare. As a matter of fact, in 1987, it was determined that dimethyl sulfate is so dangerous, it only takes 10 minutes of exposure to half a gram of it per cubic meter to kill someone. And of the 20 symptoms that were reported in the hospital that night, 19 of them are directly linked to symptoms of DMSO4. The only one that wasn't linked is vomiting. That was never seen in dimethyl sulfate experiments. But if someone's undergoing, face burning and muscle spasms and paralysis and all those other things, they might throw up. So you may be thinking, all right, that makes sense. The DMSO2 became DMSO4, and that's what got everyone sick. However, there is a hiccup in that theory. While it's easy to make DMSO DMSO2 because all you do is just add another oxygen atom to the sulfur, you can't just add 2 more oxygen to make DMSO4. Because for DMSO4 to happen, the sulfur has to break both of its methyl bonds, which are pretty strong. My organic chemistry class is finally coming back to help me. The sulfur has to break 2 methyl bonds, which are both strong, and then connect to 2 additional oxygen atoms, and then those oxygen atoms connect to the methyl groups. Meaning that whereas for the first step, it's just, oh, add some oxygen and there you go. For the second one, you need a lot of energy to break everything down to its base components and then reform as dimethyl sulfate. And dimethyl sulfate itself is a pretty strong chemical. It doesn't vaporize until 370 degrees Fahrenheit. So in order to break down all of these elements and put them back together as DMSO4, it would take a lot of energy. But do you know what's got a lot of energy? A defibrillator. Grant proposed a theory that perhaps the DMSO2 in her body, which formed from the DMSO and oxygen, was electrocuted by the defib that gave it enough energy to either break apart the bonds it had or to restructure itself with the other chemicals and elements that were present in Gloria's body. Now, this has never been recreated in a lab because we can't, hook people up to a bunch of chemicals and then electrocute them to see what happens. Although that'd be kind of cool. But this has never been recreated in a lab, so it's all theoretical if this could even happen. But some scientists agree that it is possible that if you put this combination of DMSO2 along with the other trace elements that would be found in her body and then electrocute that it could theoretically form dimethyl sulfate, which would turn the emergency room at Riverside General Hospital into a gas chamber. Now, a very diluted one, mind you. There wouldn't be enough in her system that it would be immediately lethal to anyone standing around, but definitely enough to make them sick. It's also the only thing that could explain everything that happened, from the weird smells to everyone getting ill to the crystals in her blood. There's nothing else that makes sense, at least not any one answer. Because the series of events that had to happen is absurd. Like, to make sure we're all on the same page, Gloria Ramirez had cervical cancer, so she decided to get an oven cleaner or a degreaser in order to try to remedy that cancer, so she takes that. She then has heart palpitations likely brought on by the kidney failure, which, mind you, the reason that level of DMSO might have been lethal or in concentration enough to cause the effect it eventually did is because she wasn't able to urinate it out of her system because of the kidney failure, which might have been exacerbated and probably was because of the DMSO. So because she takes this alternative medicine and also has kidney failure, it creates a combination that whenever she gets into the ambulance, the oxygen that's pumped into her lungs combines with that to make DMSO2. Again, fine for now, but then that compilation of DMSO2 that's staying in her system gets electrocuted with chest paddles, which in that moment turns Gloria into a toxic gas factory. One of the most bizarre one-off moments in medical history that almost killed a lot of people and perhaps definitely killed Ramirez. Which, if that's true, then no wonder they were unable to revive her, because the inside of her body was producing a nerve agent. And yes, again, while without another chemical being added, it takes 370 degrees to get this stuff to vaporize, a small amount of it will vaporize naturally. Perhaps small enough to just make the people in the building sick instead of killing everyone. Now, it should also be mentioned that the family of Gloria has vehemently denied that she ever used DMSO. And I hate to go against, what a family says about a lost loved one, but I don't see any other way this case could be explained. There's a lot of conspiracy theories about the case too, which are completely unfounded, but I have to mention them because it's me. A few of the weird details are the syringe that contained the actual crystals of supposedly DMSO2 disappeared. No one was able to find that syringe after the incident. And while that isn't unheard of, a lot of people used it as fuel for the fire. Another detail is the coroner, who was originally investigating all of this, took his own life about a month after Gloria died, so people think he was silenced. And the other weird detail is Gloria's third autopsy. So Gloria had the first autopsy that was a week after her death. She had the second one where they took samples 6 weeks after her death. And then the family, who didn't believe the hospital or the laboratory saying it was the whole DMSO thing, had a coroner do a private autopsy 10 weeks after Gloria's death. During that third autopsy, Gloria's heart was missing and a lot of her internal organs had fecal matter on them. And a lot of people point to these things about the coroner, about the autopsy being weird, and the syringe missing to say there was some kind of cover-up. There was a theory that got passed around the News Times LA that the hospital was smuggling methamphetamine, and that what actually happened is someone accidentally hooked up one of these smuggling IV bags full of meth to Gloria, and everyone in the hospital got hit with a vaporized meth. For one, that would have been found in the autopsy report, and no. Like, trust me, if there's anyone out here who wants to point fingers at an establishment and say that there's some grand conspiracy that people are unaliving themselves over, it's me. But we have to have some kind of merit to work with, guys, or else we're just going to get made fun of. I mean, more than we already are. The syringe was either thrown away or lost in the confusion of the hospital being evacuated and then cleared. The whole coroner death doesn't look like it was related at all to Gloria. That guy had a lot on his plate with a lot of different investigations that he was doing. And if you'll remember, whenever they did the second autopsy with Gloria, they took a lot of samples. And since her cause of death was heart failure, it's reasonable that they would have removed her heart for future study. And also, the third coroner mentioned that a lot of her internals were too badly decomposed to really analyze anything. So it's not out of the question, if some organs were removed and others cut, that some fecal matter could have seeped out into the rest of the body. Again, Gloria's family maintains that she never used DMSO, and Gloria's sister has gone on record saying that it is the hospital's fault for Gloria's death and the poor sanitary conditions at that hospital. Although in following investigations, this was never supported. And while it can never be proved with 100% efficiency because the samples are too old to be analyzed now, and we didn't have any testimony or reports then that were looking for something like DMSO, it seems to me that this is the most likely option, as outlandish as it is. And with this case, I noticed a lot of people who talk about it there's two approaches to it. There's the approach that I grew up with on YouTube that a lot of you are probably familiar with, where this is treated like a supernatural occurrence, like the mysterious toxic lady who went into a hospital and then everyone around her got sick and maybe she was possessed or like had some kind of demon plague or whatever. And the other approach I've seen is with people who are following the whole DMSO theory, that she effectively used a hardware store paint remover in order to treat her cancer, and that is what kicked off the series of events that led to the mysterious toxic lady death. A lot of those people have a tone of, oh, imagine being so stupid that you end up nearly killing a whole hospital room full of people. Or they at least kind of have this tone that Gloria was dumb enough to use DMSO to try to treat her cancer. And I think the thing to keep in mind with all of that is that Gloria Ramirez was diagnosed with cancer 6 weeks before she was dead. She was a wife and a mother of two who, it seems from the records, never began chemotherapy. More than likely because her, again, prognosis wasn't good and her chances on chemo weren't good, or maybe she just couldn't afford it, or the insurance wouldn't back it because there wasn't a point, who knows. But she was a mother who was about to die, and it seemed that normal medicine wasn't going to do anything, so of course she's going to try something weird or out of the box. And as far as the idea that she's somehow responsible, or I should say willingly responsible for what happened in the hospital room, it is still debated in laboratories to this day if that series of events was even possible. There is no way she could have known at the time that putting that on her skin would cause a series of events that gets a hospital room full of people sick. Just like how whenever the doctor hit her with the defib, like, there was no way for him to know that he was exciting elements to cause a chain reaction that converted an alternative medicine into a weaponized gas. The story of Gloria Ramirez is a tragedy. And it's incredibly fascinating that something like that can occur in the world that we seemingly know everything about. And it's cases like this that opened up our mind and understanding of the world around us, and hopefully lead to new discoveries in the future. Off of this case alone, there's still people experimenting what DMSO can do to try to better understand ways that we can accidentally form dangerous chemicals in healthcare or industrial settings. And also still experiments of DMSO and its use as a treatment for diseases or pain, that the Gloria Ramirez case is used as an important footnote. So hopefully, in spite of being a tragedy of the past, the story of the toxic lady can reshape our understanding of the future. And I, of course, also just wanted to talk to you guys about the crazy series of events that led a normal heart palpitation into a nerve gas, because that's insane. I have to talk about that. And hopefully you enjoyed hearing it at least half as much as I enjoyed talking about it, and that's really cool. And I'm glad you're here, and I just want to say thank you for watching. Like I said earlier, this is a case that I remember seeing on YouTube forever, like listening to old creepypasta channels talk about the mysterious woman who got an entire hospital sick. Was it a demon? Was it a ghost? Who knows? And then I was thinking about that case because I remember it being called the Toxic Lady. I was like, oh, I should make a video on that. And I searched it up and came across all of this, and I'm like, wow, that's depressing. I still have to talk about it because that's insane that all of that happened, but it's super depressing. So now you get to be depressed too. Congratulations. But yeah, I had to talk about this. It's wild. But yeah, the Toxic Lady is a story that but I wouldn't say it's ruined, because as a kid, I was never like, oh, maybe it was a demon or whatever. Like, I always knew it was some kind of, freak, either virus or infection or what have you. But it's more terrifying in a way, because it went from just being like, oh, maybe she had this one disease, into like, oh, she just put on a thing that you can buy at the store. And over just like everything that happened, it created a nerve gas. That's cool. But not cool in an actual cool way. Cool like I dread for my safety. But that's how it goes on this channel. But yeah, I'm rambling. I think it's really neat. Hopefully you thought it was really neat. And yeah, I'm very tired, as I am normally when I record these. I'm going for a few hours. So I'm going to get this edited and get it up so that you all can see it. But again, thank you guys for watching. Hopefully you've enjoyed the videos lately. I had a slow start in January getting back in the groove of YouTube. But now we're back at it. Hopefully you guys have liked what I've been doing lately, and I'm going to keep at it. So with that, that's really all I have to say. Time to start editing. So that you all can enjoy it. But hey, you guys make it worth it because you're the best. But anyway, with that, that should be all for now. But I just want to say thank you for watching. I hope that you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.